The story of Edinburgh Castle does not begin with kings, sieges, or stone walls, but deep in geological time, long before human memory. Castle Rock itself was born around 340 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, when the land that would become Scotland lay near the equator. This was a world of steaming swamps, dense vegetation, and violent volcanic activity. Beneath the surface, molten magma forced its way upward through cracks in the Earth's crust, seeking release. One such eruption did not explode outward, but instead cooled slowly underground, forming what geologists call a volcanic plug, solid, immensely hard, and resistant to erosion. As millions of years passed, the softer surrounding sedimentary rocks were worn away by wind, rain, and time, while the basalt core of the volcano remained intact. This natural imbalance between hard and soft stone is the key to Castle Rock's survival. Where weaker rock disappeared, the basalt plug stood firm, slowly emerging as a steep, isolated crag rising sharply above the surrounding landscape. Long before it was a place of power, Castle Rock was already a monument of endurance. Nature's own fortress, shaped patiently and without intention. The defining moment in Castle Rock's physical character came much later, during the last Ice Age. Vast glaciers advanced across Scotland, grinding the land beneath them like colossal sheets of moving stone. When ice met the hard volcanic core of Castle Rock, it could not carve through it. Instead, the glacier split and flowed around the obstacle. On the side facing the advancing ice, the rock was scoured into near-vertical cliffs. On the sheltered side, debris was dragged and deposited, creating a long, gentle slope. This classic crag and tail formation is what gives Castle Rock its unmistakable profile and explains why access is easy from only one direction. This asymmetrical shape would later dictate everything that humans did on the site. The sheer cliffs on three sides formed natural defences that no wall could rival, while the sloping eastern approach became the only viable route for settlement, supply, and attack. In geological terms, Castle Rock was finished, long before people arrived, but strategically, it was perfectly prepared. Few places in Britain offered such a combination of height, visibility, and defensibility created entirely by natural forces. Equally important was the rock's commanding position within the surrounding terrain. From its summit, Castle Rock overlooks the lowlands that stretch toward the Firth of Forth, offering clear views in every direction. In prehistoric times, this visibility would have meant early warning against approaching groups. Later, it meant control of trade routes, movement, and territory. The geology of the site did not merely shape the land, it shaped human behaviour, turning a natural formation into a focal point of power. The durability of basalt also played a crucial role in the castle's long-term survival. While buildings rose, fell, and were rebuilt across centuries, the rock beneath them never failed. Earthquakes, weathering, and even artillery bombardment could scar structures, but the foundation endured. This stability allowed generations to expand upward and outward with confidence, layering history directly onto geology. Every stone wall and tower ultimately rests on a foundation formed by fire deep within the earth. In this way, Castle Rock is more than the base of a famous fortress. It is the silent author of Edinburgh's history. Its volcanic birth, sculpted by ice and time, determined where power would gather and how it would be defended. Long before crowns and banners appeared on its summit, the fate of the site was already sealed by forces far older than civilization. Edinburgh Castle stands today not only as a monument of human history, but as a visible reminder that geology, slowly and relentlessly, shapes the course of human destiny. Long before stone walls crowned its summit, Edinburgh Castle stood as a place of human attention and attraction. Archaeological evidence suggests that Castle Rock was occupied by people as early as the late Bronze Age, around the 2nd millennium BCE. For these early communities, the rock was not chosen for grandeur or symbolism, but for survival. Rising sharply above the surrounding land, it offered safety, visibility, and a natural sense of order in an unpredictable world. The earliest settlers were likely small groups who understood the landscape instinctively. Castle Rock provided a rare combination of shelter and control. Its cliffs discouraged sudden attack, while its height allowed early inhabitants to observe animal movement, seasonal changes, and distant threats. In a time when survival depended on anticipation, this elevated position was invaluable. The rock was not yet a fortress, but it already functioned as a place of refuge. By the early Iron Age, Castle Rock had become more than a temporary shelter. Evidence points to the presence of a hill fort, suggesting organised, long-term settlement. Wooden palisades and earthen defences would have crowned the summit, reinforcing the natural barriers formed by geology. These structures did not dominate the landscape as later stone walls would, but they marked a shift. Castle Rock was no longer simply occupied, it was defended. Life on the rock was shaped by limitation as much as by protection. Space was restricted, water had to be carefully managed, and food supplies depended on access to the surrounding lowlands. This forced early communities to develop strong ties with the land beyond the rock. Castle Rock became the heart of a wider territory rather than an isolated stronghold, a central place from which influence radiated outward. The rock also held cultural and symbolic meaning. Elevated places across prehistoric Britain were often associated with power, ancestry, and the spiritual world. Living above the surrounding land reinforced social hierarchy and authority. Those who controlled the high ground controlled not only defence, but identity. Castle Rock likely functioned as a gathering place, a seat of leadership and a visible statement of dominance long before written history recorded its name. As centuries passed, settlement on Castle Rock was not continuous but persistent. Occupation came in waves, shaped by climate, conflict, and shifting political realities. Yet each return reinforced the same truth. This place mattered. Generations recognized its advantages independently, drawn back by the same combination of safety and command that first attracted human presence. By the time early medieval kingdoms emerged in Scotland, Castle Rock was already burdened with deep memory. Its soil held the traces of countless lives, lived before crowns, banners, or castles existed. The later fortress did not overwrite this past, it absorbed it. Early human settlement transformed Castle Rock from a natural landmark into a human one, laying the invisible foundations for the stronghold that would later dominate Scottish history. When the Roman world pressed north into Britain, Castle Rock already stood as a place shaped by centuries of human awareness. Yet the Roman era did not transform the rock through construction or conquest in the way it did other parts of Britain. Instead, its importance during this period lies in absence, tension, and observation. The Romans never built a fortress on the summit of what would later become Edinburgh Castle, but they were never far from it. Castle Rock existed just beyond the firm grip of Roman control, making it a silent witness to the limits of imperial power. During the 1st and 2nd centuries, CE, Roman armies pushed deep into southern Scotland, constructing roads, forts, and temporary camps. Their northern frontier shifted repeatedly, from the Antonine Wall back to Hadrian's Wall, reflecting uncertainty rather than dominance. Castle Rock lay north of both defensive lines, outside the zone of permanent Roman occupation. This geographical positioning mattered. It placed the rock in a frontier world, close enough to Rome to feel its pressure, yet distant enough to remain culturally distinct. The land around Castle Rock was controlled by the Votadini, a powerful local tribe who navigated a delicate balance between resistance and accommodation. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Votadini were not crushed by Roman expansion, but adapted to it, maintaining their strongholds while engaging in trade and diplomacy. Castle Rock, overlooking key routes through the Lothians, would have played a strategic role within this network. It was not a Roman site, but it was part of the Roman story. Rather than building on Castle Rock, the Romans preferred lower ground, where supply lines, roads, and standardized fort layouts were easier to maintain. Roman military logic favored efficiency over symbolism. The steep, exposed summit of Castle Rock did not fit this model. Yet its very refusal to conform made it significant. From nearby Roman positions, the rock would have been visible, a reminder that not all high ground was claimed, not all power was centralized. The Roman presence altered the region without erasing its identity. Roman goods, ideas, and influence filtered northward, reshaping local elites and economies. Castle Rock likely became part of a landscape where Roman-style authority coexisted uneasily with indigenous power structures. Control was negotiated, not imposed. The rock remained a native stronghold in a Roman-shadowed world, its importance defined by what it resisted as much as by what it absorbed. As Roman power weakened in the late 3rd and 4th centuries, this balance shifted. The withdrawal of Roman troops from Britain did not create a vacuum on Castle Rock. It revealed continuity. While Roman forts were abandoned and roads fell silent, indigenous centres like Castle Rock endured. The absence of Roman stonework on the summit is not a sign of insignificance, but of resilience. The rock had never depended on empire to define its role. In the Roman era, Castle Rock was neither conquered nor ignored. It existed in a space between worlds, shaped by proximity to Rome, but never claimed by it. This quiet independence would prove decisive in later centuries, when new kingdoms rose from the remnants of Roman Britain. While Roman frontiers faded into history, Castle Rock remained, unchanged in form but increasingly central to the story of power in northern Britain. During the early Middle Ages, the rock was known as Din Idin, a fortified royal centre of the Brittonic-speaking kingdom of Gododin. This was not yet a stone castle in the later sense, but a heavily defended citadel of timber, earthworks, and authority. From its summit, kings ruled through personal power, loyalty, and military strength. Control of the rock meant control of surrounding lands, tribute, and movement. It was less a residence than a statement. Rule was exercised from height, visibility, and dominance. Unlike Roman forts, which projected standardized imperial order, early Scottish kingship was deeply personal. The stronghold on Castle Rock functioned as a royal seat, a refuge, and a rallying point. In times of peace, it was a centre of governance and ceremony. In times of war, it became a place of last defence. The rock's natural cliffs reduced the need for massive construction, allowing early rulers to concentrate resources on warriors rather than walls. Geography did much of the work that armies otherwise would have had to do. The rock also carried symbolic weight. In early medieval society, authority was reinforced through association with ancestral places. Castle Rock was already ancient by this time, layered with memory and occupation. Kings who held it did not merely occupy a fortress, they inherited a legacy. Poems like Why Gododin reflect a world in which warrior elites gathered at Din Idin before riding to battle, linking the site directly to ideas of honour, sacrifice, and heroic rule. As political power shifted, so did control of the rock. By the 7th century, the region came under pressure from the expanding Anglian kingdom of Northumbria. Din Idin fell, and with it, a Brittonic royal centre. Yet even in defeat, the importance of Castle Rock was confirmed. The conquerors did not abandon it. They claimed it. Power changed hands, but the place remained indispensable. This continuity reveals a crucial truth. Castle Rock shaped kingship more than kings reshaped the rock. When Scottish identity began to consolidate in later centuries, the stronghold's earlier role was not forgotten. The rock became a bridge between past and present, connecting early tribal kingship with emerging national monarchy. Its occupation by successive rulers reinforced its reputation as the heart of authority in the region. Whoever ruled from Castle Rock could claim legitimacy rooted in deep time. By the end of the early medieval period, the foundations were set for transformation. Timber defences would give way to stone, and warrior courts would become royal castles. Yet the essence of the site did not change. Castle Rock had proven itself as a seat of power long before Scotland existed as a unified kingdom. Its role as the stronghold of early Scottish kings was not an accident of history, but the result of centuries of natural advantage, human memory, and political necessity converging on a single, commanding piece of land. The conflict began in the shadow of a dynastic crisis. After the death of Alexander III and his heir, Scotland was left vulnerable, and Edward I of England exploited this weakness. When English forces moved north, Edinburgh Castle was swiftly occupied. Its natural defences made it extremely difficult to assault, and Edward understood its value. Holding the castle meant holding the key to southeastern Scotland. From its heights, English garrisons could dominate the region, projecting power without the need for large armies in the field. For the Scots, this occupation was intolerable. The castle's presence in English hands was a constant reminder of subjugation. Yet direct assault was rarely an option. The steep cliffs and narrow access routes favoured the defenders, and medieval siege technology struggled against such terrain. Instead, the struggle for the castle became one of patience, daring, and timing. It was not brute force that would reclaim Edinburgh Castle, but ingenuity and resolve. One of the most dramatic moments came in 1314, on the eve of the Battle of Bannockburn. A small group of Scottish soldiers, led by Thomas Randolph's allies, launched a surprise night attack. Scaling the seemingly impassable cliffs under cover of darkness, they exploited a forgotten path and overwhelmed the English garrison before an alarm could be raised. The operation was swift, precise, and devastating. Edinburgh Castle fell not through prolonged siege, but through audacity, a moment that perfectly captured the character of the Scottish resistance. The capture of the castle had consequences beyond its walls. It denied the English a crucial base and boosted Scottish morale at a critical point in the war. Recognising that the fortress could easily be retaken by a larger English force, the Scots made a calculated decision. They dismantled much of the castle's defences. This act may seem destructive, but it was deeply strategic. If Scotland could not hold the castle permanently, it would ensure that neither could England. The rock remained, but its military value was temporarily neutralised. Throughout the wars, Edinburgh Castle repeatedly changed hands, reflecting the unstable nature of the conflict itself. Control of the fortress rose and fell with the fortunes of kings and armies. Each occupation left scars, damaged walls, altered structures, and lessons learned about warfare in a changing medieval world. The castle became a testing ground for evolving siege tactics and defensive strategies, shaped by the realities of prolonged conflict. When Robert the Bruce emerged as the central figure of Scottish resistance, Edinburgh Castle was no longer just a military objective. It was a political test. Control of the castle meant proof of authority. For Bruce, whose kingship was challenged from within and threatened from without, reclaiming and securing such symbols was essential. Victory on the battlefield mattered, but legitimacy was built by holding the places that defined Scotland's past and future. After the dramatic recapture of Edinburgh Castle in 1314, Bruce faced a hard truth. Scotland was not yet secure. English armies could return at any moment, and the castle's position made it both an asset and a liability. Bruce's response revealed his strategic depth. Rather than risk losing the fortress again, he ordered its partial destruction. This was not retreat. It was control through denial. By dismantling the defences, Bruce ensured that no occupying force could easily use the castle against Scotland. The rock remained Scottish, even without walls. This decision marked a turning point in how power was exercised. Bruce understood that castles were tools, not trophies. Edinburgh Castle's value lay in what it could enable or prevent, merely in its possession. In choosing when to hold and when to dismantle, Bruce demonstrated a form of kingship shaped by long struggle. His authority was not based on static monuments, but on mobility, loyalty, and calculated restraint. As Bruce consolidated power across Scotland, the importance of Edinburgh Castle shifted once again. With English influence receding, the need to neutralise the fortress faded. Gradually, Scottish control became stable enough for rebuilding to begin. This transition, from destruction to restoration, mirrored the broader transformation of Bruce's reign. What began as survival evolved into governance. The castle could now serve Scotland rather than threaten it. Under Bruce's authority, the meaning of Edinburgh Castle deepened. It became a symbol not of conquest, but of recovery. Its earlier cycles of occupation and loss were replaced by continuity. For the first time in generations, Scottish kingship was no longer reactive. The rock that had witnessed fragmentation now stood within a unified realm. Control of the castle no longer required constant defence. It reflected accepted sovereignty. Equally important was the psychological impact. Bruce's successful management of Edinburgh Castle sent a clear message to allies and enemies alike. Scotland couldn't only resist, but decide the fate of its most critical strongholds. Authority flowed from deliberate choice, not desperation. The castle's survival under Scottish control reinforced Bruce's claim as a king who ruled by judgment as much as by force. By the end of Robert the Bruce's reign, Edinburgh Castle was firmly anchored within the Scottish kingdom. Its walls would rise again, stronger and more permanent, but their foundations rested on decisions made during the hardest years of independence. Bruce did not simply reclaim the castle, he redefined its role. From that point forward, Edinburgh Castle stood not as a contested prize, but as a cornerstone of Scottish authority, shaped by a king who understood that true control begins with knowing when to fight, when to destroy, and when to build anew. The earliest stages of rebuilding focused on security, but with a new mindset. Rather than simply restoring what had been lost, Scottish rulers reimagined the fortress in light of recent experience. Walls were thickened, access routes controlled more carefully, and towers positioned to dominate the vulnerable eastern approach. The lessons of siege warfare were now etched into architecture. Every gate, stair, and curtain wall reflected an understanding that Edinburgh Castle must never again be easily neutralised. As political stability increased during the 14th and 15th centuries, expansion followed defence. The castle was no longer just a military installation. It became a royal centre. Residential buildings were expanded to accommodate the court, officials, and visiting nobles. Living space, storage, and administrative functions grew side by side, transforming the summit from a battlefield refuge into a functioning seat of power. The rock that had once hosted emergency garrisons now supported daily governance. One of the most significant developments of this era was the construction of monumental stone halls. These were not purely practical structures. They were visual declarations of authority. Large halls allowed kings to hold councils, feasts, and ceremonies within the castle walls, reinforcing Edinburgh Castle's role as the political heart of the realm. Power was no longer exercised only through defence, but through presence and ritual, all framed by stone architecture designed to impress. Expansion also reshaped the castle's internal organisation. Space on the summit was limited, forcing builders to think vertically and efficiently. Buildings were layered, courtyards defined, and movement controlled through narrow passages and stairways. This density was not accidental. It reinforced security while maximising use of the rock's surface. The castle grew not outward, but upward and inward, becoming a tightly integrated complex rather than a loose collection of structures. Importantly, reconstruction did not erase the past. It absorbed it. Earlier foundations were reused, damaged sections incorporated into new designs, and the rock's natural contours continued to dictate form. The result was a fortress that felt organic rather than imposed. Edinburgh Castle became a structure that seemed to rise naturally from the volcanic stone beneath it, blending geology and architecture into a single expression of endurance. Life within the castle reflected this transformation. Royal apartments were developed to provide privacy, comfort, and authority, even within the fortress's confined space. These rooms were not luxurious by modern standards, but they represented a deliberate shift away from purely functional military architecture. Fireplaces, decorated interiors, and controlled access points all signalled that this was a home as well as a stronghold. The king's physical presence within the castle reinforced its status as the centre of rule, not merely a refuge in times of crisis. The Great Hall became the symbolic heart of the royal residence. Here, feasts were held, councils convened, and justice administered. The hall was designed to impress. High ceilings, vast open space, and prominent positioning all communicated authority. In a society where power was performed as much as enforced, these gatherings mattered. Loyalty was affirmed, hierarchy displayed, and decisions made beneath the watchful gaze of the crown. Edinburgh Castle was no longer silent stone. It echoed with voices, ritual, and command. Yet the castle's royal function was shaped by its limitations as much as its strengths. Space on Castle Rock was finite, and the realities of medieval life imposed constraints on comfort and expansion. As a result, the royal court was often mobile, moving between residences depending on season, politics, and security. Edinburgh Castle served as a principal seat of power, but not an exclusive one. Its importance lay in moments of ceremony, crisis, and legitimacy rather than constant habitation. The castle's role as a royal residence also carried profound symbolic weight. To rule from Edinburgh Castle was to align oneself with centuries of authority embedded in the rock itself. The castle connected early kingship, independent struggles, and emerging monarchy into a single narrative. Every royal birth, council, or proclamation made within its walls added another layer to its identity as the living heart of the kingdom. Security remained ever present, shaping daily life at court. Guards, controlled entrances, and constant readiness reminded inhabitants that royal authority was still contested. The castle's dual nature, home and fortress, defined the experience of kingship in medieval Scotland. Comfort was secondary to survival, and ceremony unfolded under the shadow of potential conflict. This tension gave the royal residence a unique character, blending intimacy with vigilance. From the moment one enters the Great Hall, its proportions dominate the senses. The vast open interior was intentionally designed to overwhelm. This was a room meant to be seen, not merely used. The king sat elevated at one end, while nobles, clerics, and officials filled the long floor below. Hierarchy was physically embedded into the space. Where one stood, where one sat, and how close one was allowed to approach the crown all reinforced the structure of medieval Scottish society. The hall's most striking feature is its hammer beam roof, a technical and symbolic achievement. Constructed entirely of timber, it allowed for a wide, uninterrupted interior without internal support columns. This openness was not accidental. It created a single unified space where the king could address all present at once, visually dominating the room. The roof itself became a statement of confidence, proof that Scotland possessed both the craftsmanship and resources to rival any European court. The Great Hall functioned as far more than a banquet room. It was a political engine. Councils were held here, disputes resolved, alliances affirmed, and loyalty tested. Feasts were political events, not celebrations alone. To be invited into the Great Hall was to be recognised. To be excluded was to be diminished. Every gathering reinforced bonds between crown and nobility, while reminding all participants of the authority that convened them. Sound and spectacle played crucial roles in shaping experience. The hall amplified voices, music, and ritual. Proclamations echoed off stone walls, while banners and arms displayed lineage and allegiance. In an age without mass communication, this space served as a stage for governance itself. Decisions made here carried weight precisely because they were witnessed, shared, and remembered collectively. Despite its grandeur, the Great Hall was never detached from the realities of power. Armed guards lined the walls, and access was tightly controlled. The same space that hosted feasts could swiftly transform into a chamber of judgment or command. This duality defined the hall's character. It embodied confidence, but never complacency. Authority was displayed openly, yet always protected. Within Edinburgh Castle, power is not expressed only through walls and towers, but through objects that embody sovereignty itself. The crown jewels of Scotland, often called the honours of Scotland, and the Stone of Destiny represent authority in its most concentrated form. Unlike fortifications built to resist enemies, these artifacts were designed to command loyalty, continuity, and belief. Their significance lies not in material value alone. but in the ideas they carried across centuries. The crown jewels consist of three primary elements: the crown, the sceptre, and the sword of state. Each played a distinct role in the ceremony of kingship. The crown symbolized divine authority, the sceptre justice and governance, and the sword the duty to defend the realm. Together, they formed a complete visual language of rule. When displayed or used, they transformed an individual into a monarch in the eyes of the realm. Their presence within Edinburgh Castle anchored the castle's role as the ceremonial heart of Scotland. These objects were not static symbols locked away from history. They were carried into coronations, parliaments, and moments of national crisis. Their surfaces bear the weight of repeated use, not merely decorative intention. Gold, silver, and precious stones were chosen not only for splendour, but for permanence. In a medieval world where legitimacy could be fragile, the physical endurance of these objects reinforced the idea of an enduring crown. The Stone of Destiny, by contrast, was striking in its simplicity. Rough, unadorned, and ancient, it carried a different kind of authority. Used in the coronation of Scottish kings for centuries, the stone represented continuity with the past rather than royal magnificence. To sit upon it was to claim a lineage, older than written history. Its power came from tradition and belief, not craftsmanship. In many ways, it embodied the idea that kingship was inherited from the land itself. The removal of the Stone of Destiny by Edward I of England in 1296 was therefore not an act of theft alone. It was a calculated assault on Scottish sovereignty. By placing the stone beneath the English coronation chair, Edward sought to absorb Scotland's legitimacy into his own rule. The absence of the stone was deeply felt in Scotland, turning it into a symbol of loss and resistance. Its eventual return, centuries later, restored more than an object. It restored a narrative interrupted by conquest. The crown jewels themselves narrowly escaped destruction during periods of upheaval. During the 17th century, they were hidden to prevent their capture, disappearing from public view for decades. When they were rediscovered, their survival was seen as almost miraculous. This episode transformed them from ceremonial tools into symbols of national endurance. They had outlived war, occupation, and political transformation, much like the castle that sheltered them. Today, displayed together within Edinburgh Castle, the crown jewels and the Stone of Destiny tell a story that no single object could convey alone. One speaks of crafted authority, the other of ancestral legitimacy. One shines with royal splendour, the other endures in silence. Together, they define Scottish kingship, not as a moment of power, but as a continuous relationship between ruler, people, and land. In their presence, the castle becomes more than a historic site. It becomes a vault of memory, where sovereignty itself has been guarded, challenged, and ultimately preserved. Mons Meg was forged in the mid-15th century, a product of Burgundian military innovation, and represented the cutting edge of siege technology. Its sheer scale was astonishing even by contemporary standards. Built to fire stone projectiles weighing hundreds of pounds, it was not designed for rapid fire or battlefield maneuvering. Instead, it was a weapon of psychological dominance. Its presence alone altered the balance of power, forcing defenders and attackers alike to reconsider what fortification meant in an age of artillery. When Mons Meg arrived at Edinburgh Castle, it transformed the fortress's identity. The castle was no longer defined only by its walls and elevation, but by its ability to strike from a distance with devastating force. Positioned on the heights of Castle Rock, the cannon turned geography into a weapon. Fired from above, its projectiles carried both destructive power and symbolic weight, reinforcing the idea that royal authority could now reach beyond walls and into enemy territory. The cannon's role extended beyond warfare. Mons Meg was used ceremonially, fired on occasions of royal celebration and state display. These firings were not tactical decisions, but political theatre. The thunderous roar echoed across the city, reminding subjects and rivals alike that the crown possessed both the means and the will to enforce its authority. In a world where visibility mattered, sound became a form of messaging. Yet Mons Meg also revealed the limits of early artillery. Its immense power came at the cost of precision and reliability. The stresses placed on its iron barrel were extreme, and repeated use weakened the weapon. Eventually, a catastrophic firing rendered it unusable. This moment is telling. Heavy artillery promised dominance, but it also introduced new vulnerabilities. Technology could empower rulers, but it could also fail them. Edinburgh Castle, long defined by permanence, now housed a weapon that embodied both strength and fragility. Despite its operational decline, Mons Meg never lost its symbolic importance. It stood as a monument to transition, the moment when medieval warfare crossed into the early modern world. Its silent presence within the castle grounds reminded observers that power was evolving, shaped increasingly by engineering and innovation rather than tradition alone. The castle's defences were no longer static, they were adaptive, responsive to change. This transformation was driven by political reality. Rebellions, civil wars, and religious conflict repeatedly destabilised Scotland from the 16th century onward. The crown required a secure base in the capital, one that could house troops, store weapons, and dominate the surrounding city if necessary. Castle Rock's elevation made it ideal for this role. From its heights, artillery could command Edinburgh itself, turning the castle into both protector and threat, depending on who held it. Daily life inside the garrison followed strict routines. Soldiers drilled in the courtyards, maintained weapons, and stood watch along the walls. Barracks replaced royal chambers, and storage rooms fickled with powder, shot, and supplies. The castle became a self-contained military community, governed by discipline rather than courtly ritual. This constant readiness reflected a new understanding of power. Authority was enforced not by lineage alone, but by permanent armed presence. The castle's design adapted accordingly. Defensive works were modified to suit firearms rather than medieval siege engines. Gun platforms replaced older battlements, and access points were more tightly controlled. The architecture of the garrison emphasised endurance and efficiency. Comfort was secondary. Thick walls, narrow passages, and layered defences ensured that the castle could withstand prolonged pressure from both internal unrest and external threat. One of the most striking aspects of the garrison era was the castle's relationship with the city below. Edinburgh Castle no longer simply defended the population, it also controlled it. In moments of unrest, the guns of the castle could be turned inward. This dynamic gave the fortress a dual identity, a symbol of national security and a reminder of state authority imposed by force. The presence of soldiers above the city reshaped how power was perceived and experienced. Over time, the garrison absorbed the rhythms of empire. As Scotland became part of a wider British military system, Edinburgh Castle served as a hub for recruitment, training, and imprisonment. Soldiers passed through its gates on their way to wars far beyond Scotland. The castle's walls contained not just local history, but global connections, echoes of campaigns fought overseas by men who once stood watch on Castle Rock. During the Jacobite occupation of Edinburgh in 1745, the contrast was striking. Charles Edward Stuart's forces took control of the city with relative ease, but the castle itself remained firmly in government hands. From Castle Rock, artillery dominated the streets below, making a direct assault by the Jacobites impractical. The castle did not fall because it did not need to be stormed. Its guns ensured that it could survive in isolation, even while the city around it changed allegiance. This moment underlined a new truth. The castle could no longer decide wars, only endure them. The siege that followed was brief and inconclusive. Jacobite artillery lacked the range, weight, and organisation needed to challenge a well-supplied fortress designed for gunpowder defence. Meanwhile, the castle's firepower could punish the city, but not reclaim political control beyond its walls. This stalemate revealed the limits of fixed fortifications in an age of mobile armies. Power was shifting away from stone strongholds toward field forces, logistics, and national coordination. After the failure of the Jacobite cause, the castle's military purpose began to narrow. The threat of large-scale internal rebellion diminished, and Britain's strategic focus increasingly turned outward toward empire and continental war. Edinburgh Castle remained useful, but no longer essential. It functioned as a garrison, arsenal, and prison rather than a decisive battlefield asset. Its guns guarded order, not borders. Technological change further reduced the castle's relevance. Artillery grew more powerful, more accurate, and more mobile. Fixed, high-ground positions, once invaluable, became predictable and vulnerable. Castle Rock, which had once dictated the shape of warfare around it, now belonged to an older logic of defence. The fortress was still formidable, but it no longer represented the future of military strategy. At the same time, the symbolic role of the castle began to outweigh its practical function. It stood as a reminder of authority rather than an active instrument of control. Its presence deterred unrest, but it did not shape campaigns. Soldiers stationed there lived routine lives of maintenance and ceremony, far removed from the decisive engagements being fought elsewhere. The castle had become a guardian of stability rather than a weapon of war. By the beginning of the 19th century, Edinburgh Castle had reached a decisive moment in its long history. The age of siege warfare had passed, and the castle's military role was no longer central to Britain's defence. Yet, rather than fading into obsolescence, the fortress underwent a transformation in meaning. It was no longer valued for what it could repel, but for what it represented. Edinburgh Castle became a symbol of endurance, of identity, and of Scotland's distinct historical path. This shift coincided with a broader cultural movement. Across Europe, the 19th century saw a renewed fascination with national history, medieval architecture, and romanticised landscapes. In Scotland, this movement carried particular weight. The castle, rising dramatically above the capital, offered a tangible connection to a past defined by independence, monarchy, and conflict. Preservation efforts began not to modernise the site, but to protect its layered history. Restoration aimed to stabilise, not reinvent. These early preservation projects were selective and symbolic. Architects and historians focused on reinforcing medieval and early modern elements, emphasising the castle's role in Scotland's national story. Structures associated with royal authority, military resilience, and symbolic artefacts were prioritised. This approach reflected a growing belief that the castle was not merely old stone, but a narrative carved into the landscape, one that needed to be carefully curated rather than reshaped. As restoration progressed, Edinburgh Castle increasingly became a public space rather than a closed military one. Its identity shifted from fortress to monument. Visitors were no longer soldiers or officials, but citizens and travellers. Walking through its gates became an act of historical engagement. The castle invited people to look backward, to imagine earlier centuries, and to locate themselves within a longer national timeline. This new role deepened the castle's symbolic power. It came to represent continuity in a rapidly changing world. Industrialization was reshaping cities and societies, yet the castle remained visually unchanged, anchoring Edinburgh's skyline. Its silhouette became inseparable from the idea of Scotland itself. Paintings, literature, and later photography reinforced this image, turning the castle into a national icon recognised far beyond the country's borders. The castle's transformation was not without tension. As a preserved site, it had to balance authenticity with accessibility. Decisions about restoration required careful judgment. How much to repair, what to leave, weathered, and which historical period to emphasise. These choices shaped public memory. The castle did not present a single moment in time, but a layered narrative, allowing visitors to encounter multiple eras within the same space. In the 20th century, this symbolic role expanded further. Edinburgh Castle became a focal point for national ceremony and collective memory. Military traditions were preserved not for combat, but for commemoration. Regiments, memorials, and rituals linked the castle to sacrifice and service, reinforcing its emotional resonance. The fortress no longer prepared for war. It remembered it. Today, Edinburgh Castle stands as one of Scotland's most visited landmarks, but its popularity has not diminished its gravity. Overlooking the city, it continues to dominate the physical and psychological landscape. Visitors arrive not simply to see walls and towers, but to experience the weight of history concentrated in one place. The castle offers perspective on how power rises and fades, how nations endure, and how identity is shaped over time. Modern interpretation within the castle emphasizes storytelling rather than spectacle. Exhibitions, preserved spaces, and carefully framed views encourage reflection. The crown jewels, the Great Hall, the gun batteries, and the ancient rock itself all contribute to a unified narrative. Each element speaks to a different aspect of Scotland's past, yet all converge on the same theme: resilience, shaped by centuries of challenge. In this way, Edinburgh Castle today is neither relic nor ruin. It is an active participant in cultural memory. Its preservation is not an act of nostalgia, but of recognition. An acknowledgement that history matters not only for what it explains, but for what it inspires. The castle embodies conflict without glorifying it, authority without enforcing it, and identity without narrowing it. Standing above Edinburgh, unchanged in form yet transformed in meaning, the castle remains what it has always been at its core: a focal point. Once it gathered armies and kings. Now it gathers memory and meaning. Through preservation, Edinburgh Castle has achieved a different kind of power, one that does not command through force, but through presence, reminding each generation that the past is not distant, but always watching from the heights.